This week, the former Liberal member for Lindsay, Jackie Kelly, quit the party after being a member for 2 decades. Now, she hasn't gone quietly, accusing the party of being run by lobbyists and the New South Wales executive of stalling on internal party reforms.
For more on this and other top stories of the week, we're joined by Jackie Kelly and the Greens member of the Upper House, of the New South Wales Upper House, David Shoebridge. Welcome to you both.
Morning.
Jackie, tell us, why did you quit the party?
I think, David, you reiterated that quite well. Look, it was a long time coming. It's something I didn't take lightly. It's the third time I've quit various positions in the party. I think the first time was when I quit as the member for Lindsay, and at that time I resigned because with young children, it was a very, very hard thing to do. And at that time, I was hoping by resigning, the party would do more to support women with young children into politics and you know, in through the party, and would have a more, you know, feminine party. The second time was as on women's vice president of our women's branch of the party, which is used to be a very, very strong branch of the party. Had a big say in all of our local and national conferences that brought up women's issues. You know, how women at childcare, things that really affect women in the burbs. You know, your dentists' wives, those sort of things. And I think that was a huge influence on our party having on the line, on the ball policy to support a large swathe of Australia's population. And then this time, obviously, again, where you are looking for more reform from the party, and it is stalling yet again on some very clear direction that how it has given the party in how to go in the future. So I don't know that a third resignation is going to have any effect at all. Certainly the last two didn't, but I hope so.
Yeah, well, don't you think perhaps, given it is the third resignation, the Liberal Party are going to be sort of rolling their eyes going, oh, OK, all right, fair enough. But you're saying, though, particularly this time, it's linked to, in New South Wales, where we've seen so many Liberals hauled before the Independent Commission Against Corruption over party donations in the lead up to the last election. You're saying that could have all been avoided?
That's right. The response to the party is, let's increase electoral laws, let's make these people absolute criminals, let's fine them, bang on the back, without looking at themselves and saying, hang on a minute, wasn't there a culture in the party? Isn't there a workplace culture going on here? And you know that yourself when you go into a certain shop, and I could actually name names, but it's the ABC, and you kind of go, hello, and you know that there is a culture within this workplace. And then you go to others, say McDonald's, and it's a very vibrant, strong culture, workplace culture. You know, those things are critical to any organisation. And when the culture in an organisation is wrong, you need to fix it.
Just very specifically, you're saying that at the moment the Liberal Party, it doesn't promote transparency, it doesn't promote enough checks and balances around donations. What specifically is your issue?
On Women's Council, trying to get a role of people who actually are members of Women's Council. I'm the Vice President. You can't get one. The party doesn't actually have a trajectory of membership beyond 5 years.
It's not democratic enough. It needs more involvement from its members.
It needs plebiscites. We need to move to how the Victorian branch organises their plebiscites, their elections to other party officials as well as elected members. I think that democracy needs to happen within our party.
Well, David, you've been sitting on the sidelines as such, watching all this unfold. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, I think it does. It's that whatever it takes attitude that used to be said was only the New South Wales Labor right, but you can see it's taken charge of the Liberal Party. And if you think about going into that 2011 election, they were going to get a landslide victory in any event. Yet they were still out there doing whatever it takes to take bags of cash from developers, to ignore internal democracy in their party. And Jackie's right. There's a culture in New South Wales politics, an entrenched culture in both those major parties, that spits out people who want to engage with it for the right reasons. Because unless you're in with the factions, unless you're bringing in the donations, they don't really want you.
Now, David, obviously we are a national show. We're talking about the fact about to what extent I think our whole political system, our Australian political system, should have checks and balances around money. You know, is it appropriate to have special influence or special favours by contributing certain money to all political parties. I mean, how does it work in the Greens? What do you have to declare if people donate money to you?
Well, we have very tight limits in New South Wales, maximum of $2,000, no corporate donations, no organisational donations.
Probably, though,
federally.
Will the big corporations be donating to the Greens?
Well, you'd be surprised. I mean, there would be corporations who would think they might have a political interest, large wind power generations or other corporate entities. And the problem is when you take their money and you then advocate on their behalf, it looks deeply compromised. And that's the same when Labor does it or the Coalition does it for coal. And I think we need to get politics beyond that. But whatever steps are taken in New South Wales will be overwhelmed because there is a complete absence of this at a federal level. The money is awash at a federal level, and we saw in New South Wales when they couldn't donate at a state level, they just went around and put the buckets of cash into the Liberal and the Coalition federally. We've got to have a national reform.
Let's just move to other issues that are dominating world headlines at the moment, and also in Australia, of course, Ebola and Australia's response to that. Now, more importantly, the Australian government saying they're not willing to send any health workers to West Africa. They don't feel as though it's safe enough to do so. It would be irresponsible. Should they be doing so?
I have a defence background, and so does my husband. I mean, we bleed blue for this nation, and you do want to know that when your government sends you to a place where you're risking your life, it is in an outcome that is worth the sacrifice. You know, Australia has a limited resources capable of dealing with containment, with quarantine, and you're talking about military quarantines, exposure of our defence personnel to a potentially, we don't know yet, but a very, very virulent strain of Ebola, which I think America and England have better chances at finding vaccinations to, at finding a cure for. They have enormous biological warfare programs. We don't even go there. We don't have nuclear, we don't have biological warfare, we don't have germ warfare, we don't have chemical, we have nothing to even protect our defence personnel, and you would send them there. I think, I personally, I would not be sending my friends in the Defence Force.
You wouldn't want to go yourself if you're in that position?
I would not want to go. You know, I would not want to go, and I don't think we should be forcing defence people to go.
Is anybody forcing defence people to go, though? Aren't we saying that doctors who would want to go?
Well, and I think there have been medical workers here, health workers, who are saying they're willing to go, but they can't get the permission to go, and if they had the backing of the government, it would obviously facilitate that.
Look, I think any volunteer in Australia can do that. Any volunteer, if you're a doctor and have expertise, you can fly to England, and they're more than willing to get you into the area. They're screaming out for helpers, and certainly I think Australia should be funding that. But I don't think that if you contract an illness while you're there, we should be responsible as people on the ground to deal with it and bring you back to Australia. And with defence people, you must deal with it and bring them back to Australia. I'm not having defence bodies buried somewhere overseas. I mean, when we send people overseas in this day and age, we're on the understanding that your relatives will have some way of grieving you. No more unknown soldier tombs. We're not doing that anymore.
David?
Well, this goes well beyond defence. And of course our government should be doing everything it can to put some structures in place so that our medical personnel who want to go over there can go over there and fight this disease before it grows exponentially. The World Health Organization is telling us this is a disease that grows exponentially unless it's contained. And if we do nothing, within months there could be as many as 1 million infections in Africa. It's in our national interest, even if we're just looking at our very national local interests, to make sure this doesn't spread. Because it becomes endemic in Africa, well then the very problems Jackie talks about will become endemic in Australia. We'll be dealing with it coming across borders, even on our narrow self-interest. And I'd hope we think about the interests of the people there in Africa as well. We should be doing everything we can to facilitate teams in there to control it on the ground.
But you disagree with Jackie? Rather than actually asking for volunteers or allowing those people to go, Australia should be assembling a team.
And we should be investing in getting people over there, and we should be committing to working with our allies or whoever else is on the ground to having evacuation plans in place. If the US can get their medical teams out, surely we should be cooperating with them so as we can get our medical teams out. It's not too hard. It's just that I think this government's attention is very much elsewhere on the international agenda.
All right, now let's talk about the shirt front incident. I think I've had so much fun with this week. It's obviously a serious topic, but the notion of, of President Putin coming off a plane and being shirt-fronted by the Prime Minister, I think is hilarious.
Look, I think it's a turn of phrase. I think probably Tony regrets ever saying it, but it is. I think it's a media beat-up. They grab these phrases and have enormous fun.
A media beat-up?
Enormous fun
Jackie,
at
surely.
political, here we go. At politicians' expense, we all have a giggle. I think good on him. I know what he meant. You're talking about the murder of Australian civilians in a foreign country by well, I don't know the absolute facts, but it is suggested they are Russian soldiers not wearing Russian military uniforms. So we're talking about Russia sanctioning terrorism. I think the discussion needs to be had. A police explain needs to be had. Now, you can look, Tony's an easy target when it comes to the alpha males. I tend to like alpha males. I married a military man myself. I kind of like the image.
Much like Vladimir Putin.
I don't mind that kind of look on the horse with the bare chest. I mean, I think the media's entitled to have a lot of fun with our pollies. I think it keeps them real, it keeps them grounded. And if he had his time again, he probably would use the wording he did later. But I think it's been quite funny. But I know what he meant, and I agree with him 100%.
David.
It may well have been a slip, but David, was it embarrassing?
I think it was puerile. It was absolutely puerile. And if Jackie wants the substance to be discussed, well, then you don't do that kind of thing, because it's all been quite a distraction. And I think people in Australia are kind of embarrassed by it, because the thought that on any ground we can win a violent confrontation with Vladimir Putin, whose army is substantially greater than ours, and I think if a push comes to shove, he's got a black belt and Tony doesn't. So the idea that we will win anything by resorting to that kind of violent, puerile attitude,
no, that's not
I
Tony.
think sums
Tony
up just
meant
how
that we're going
pathetic
in
it was, really,
with
Jackie.
20 million people up against the big bear, big Russian bear, and we are saying we will put
we're not going to
trade
win by
talks on
sending
it.
him in,
No,
Jackie.
he's going in there saying we're not going to wimp out. We're not going to come in there and have one eye on a free trade agreement with Russia when we talk about this. We are seriously talking about this at a serious level.
If we want to put serious pressure on Russia, you don't do it by having Vladimir Putin and Tony Abbott bump their chests in a hotel room. We do it by working sensibly on the international arena through the UN and putting in those sanctions. We have missed that debate this
Before
week.
it turns to fisticuffs here, much like it may well between those two, we'll have to end this. Jackie Kelly, David Shoebridge, thanks so
you very
much.
much.
Pleasure. Thanks.